The stage was silent, but the air trembled with emotion. The lights dimmed until only two silhouettes remained. Two souls standing face to face beneath the gentle shimmer of stage dust and dying echoes of applause. Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo. Once the heartbeats of every note, now the final melody in a story that had carried millions through laughter, pain, and unspoken love. The Last Symphony was not just a title. It was the embodiment of every feeling too deep to speak, every glance that said more than 1,000 words could. They had come a long way together, two men bound not by fate, but by an invisible thread of shared rhythm and resonance. Music had always been their language, their battlefield, their truest confession. But this was the end. The final concert. The last talk before the curtain fell forever. As the audience began to fade into the dark, Xiao Zhan stood by the grand piano, his fingers resting lightly on the keys. The instrument looked almost alive, its polished surface reflecting his face, a calm sea hiding a storm. His lips parted slightly as if wanting to say something, but the weight of years pressed them closed. Across from him, Wang Yibo adjusted the strap of his guitar. The faint creak of leather echoed through the hall. He didn't look up right away. Instead, he focused on tuning the strings, letting the sound fill the air like tiny sparks of remembrance. Each note brought back a fragment of their journey. The first time they met in a small studio filled with chaos and laughter, the night they stayed up composing their first song under flickering lights, and the unspoken promise they made. We'll never stop making music together. But time has its own cruel rhythm. When Yibo finally lifted his gaze, their eyes met in the stillness. It wasn't the gaze of two colleagues. It was something far deeper, a quiet recognition that the road they had walked together was ending here. You still remember what you told me back then? Yibo asked, his voice low, almost swallowed by the emptiness around them. Xiao Zhan smiled faintly, eyes glimmering. That even if the music stopped, the echo would never fade. Yibo nodded. Yeah, that one. For a moment they said nothing more. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with the ghosts of every song, every moment that had bound them in silence and sound alike. Then Xiao Zhan sat down at the piano. His fingers touched the keys, and a soft melody rose. Gentle, nostalgic, heartbreakingly familiar. It was their song. The very first one they ever wrote together. Wang Yibo joined in with his guitar, the notes weaving effortlessly into the piano's flow like a conversation between souls. It wasn't rehearsed. It didn't need to be. They had played this melody 1,000 times before, but this time it felt different. Every note trembled with the weight of goodbye. The music swelled, wrapping around them like the last embrace before a storm. Xiao Zhan's voice entered softly, almost a whisper at first, carrying lyrics they both knew by heart. When the night falls and dreams begin to fade, will you still remember the sound of us? Yibo's harmony followed, his voice rougher, deeper, a perfect counterpoint to Xiao Zhan's lightness. Their voices collided and merged, rising like the meeting of two tides. The audience, now standing in silence, could feel it, the raw pulse of truth that radiated from the stage. And then came the bridge, the part where the instruments dropped, leaving only their voices. Xiao Zhan's eyes met Yibo's once more. His lips trembled as he sang. This is not the end, it's just the silence before the next song. A faint smile ghosted across Yibo's face. Then let's make sure the silence remembers us. The hall exploded with emotion. Applause, tears, shouts, the sound of thousands saying goodbye. But for the two of them, the world outside had already faded. In this moment there was only music, only memory. When the final note lingered in the air, Xiao Zhan slowly lifted his hands from the keys. The silence that followed felt heavier than any sound before it. Wang Yibo stepped closer, placing his guitar gently on the stand. For a long heartbeat they stood face to face. Then Yibo broke the stillness. You know, he said softly, you always played like you were trying to say something. And you always listened like you already knew what it was, Xiao Zhan replied. They both laughed, a quiet, bittersweet laugh that seemed to echo through the empty hall long after it ended. The stage lights began to fade to black. Crew members moved quietly, packing away the equipment, but neither of them moved. It wasn't about the performance anymore. This was their last talk. "Do you think we'll ever play together again?" Yibo asked, his tone calm, though a flicker of something fragile passed through his eyes. "Maybe," Xiao Zhan said after a pause. "But even if we don't, I think the music will keep playing somewhere." Yibo tilted his head. "You mean in people's hearts?" Xiao Zhan shook his head slowly. "No, in ours." That was the moment, the kind of truth that doesn't need an audience. Two artists stripped of fame, applause, or spotlight, speaking the only language they'd ever truly known. The night outside was beginning to fade into dawn. Through the open backstage door, soft rays of gold spilled into the darkness, painting everything in a surreal glow. Wang Yibo looked toward the light and said, half smiling, "Looks like our encore's over." Xiao Zhan chuckled lightly. "Yeah. But what a performance, huh?" Yibo nodded, his expression softening. "Best one yet." As they walked off the stage, Xiao Zhan turned back one last time. The empty piano sat under a single beam of light, a silent witness to everything they'd been through. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Good night, my friend." And somewhere in that quiet hall, the last note of the Last Symphony still lingered, refusing to die. Weeks later, rumors began to spread about the mysterious final performance, about the way the two artists had ended their collaboration so abruptly. Some said they had a falling out. Others believed it was artistic destiny. But those who were there that night knew better. They had seen something rare, something words couldn't quite describe. In one of his interviews, Xiao Zhan was asked about that night. His eyes softened as he said, "It wasn't a goodbye. It was a thank you." When Wang Yibo was asked the same, he smiled faintly. "The song's over," he said, "but I still hear the melody sometimes. Guess that's what real music does. It never really ends." And maybe that was the truth. Maybe the Last Symphony was not about endings, but transformation, about two souls who had poured everything they were into sound until there was nothing left to say. Months later, a video surfaced online. A grainy clip recorded by a fan in the audience. It showed the final few seconds of the performance. Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo standing side by side under a falling shower of golden light, smiling faintly as the music faded into eternity. No words, no bows. Just a moment of silence. And then, Xiao Zhan placed a hand on Yibo's shoulder. The crowd roared, but the look between them said it all. It was the last talk, but not the last connection. For somewhere in the unseen threads of melody and memory, the symphony continued to play on, softly, endlessly, in the hearts of everyone who had ever heard their sound. The concert had ended, but the silence that followed carried a heartbeat of its own. The audience had left, the lights had dimmed, and only the faint hum of electricity remained in the massive hall. Yet, somewhere between the scattered sheet music and abandoned microphones, the essence of the Last Symphony still lingered. Xiao Zhan stood alone by the piano, running his fingers across the smooth ivory keys. Each note still pulsed faintly beneath his touch, as if the instrument itself remembered the emotions poured into it. He smiled, bittersweet and distant, feeling the ghost of the melody still breathing in the air. Then, footsteps echoed softly from behind. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. Wang Yibo approached, his silhouette outlined by the faint glow of the backstage light. He held his guitar by the neck, swinging it gently as if unwilling to let go. For a moment he said nothing. They didn't need words. The silence between them was loud enough to speak volumes. Finally, Yibo broke the quiet with a low chuckle. "You always do this," he said. "Stay behind after everyone's gone." Xiao Zhan's lips curved faintly. "Maybe I'm just not ready for the silence yet. Or maybe," Yibo teased, walking closer, "you just like dramatic endings." That made Xiao Zhan laugh. Soft, genuine, the kind of laugh that carried warmth through cold air. He looked up at him, the dim light catching in his eyes. "And you," he said, "always pretend you don't care, but you're still here. Yibo's smile faded into something gentler. Yeah, I'm still here. They stood in that quiet space where memory met reality, the scent of stage smoke and roses still heavy around them. On the far side of the hall, the giant LED screen still flickered faintly, showing their last performance frozen mid-frame. The final note, the shared look, the echo of something beyond sound. Yibo's voice softened. You ever think about how far we've come? Xiao Zhan nodded. All the time. From those tiny rehearsal rooms to this. It's like a dream that grew wings. Yeah, Yibo said, glancing around. Except dreams end when you wake up. There was a beat of silence. Xiao Zhan pressed one key, just one, and the note drifted up like smoke, trembling in the air before fading. Then let's not wake up, he said quietly. Yibo's eyes met his, and something unspoken passed between them. A spark of understanding, of finality, of something deeper than words could hold. He placed his guitar down gently on the piano, the strings humming a soft vibration that blended with the echo of the piano's last note. You remember that night in the rain? Ba asked suddenly. When the power went out during our first concert. Xiao Zhan laughed, eyes bright. And you kept playing even though half the audience couldn't hear you? Yeah, Yibo smiled. You joined in with a flashlight and started singing like nothing happened. That was the moment I knew we could survive anything. The laughter between them faded into silence again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of all the memories, all the late nights spent writing lyrics that turned into life stories, all the struggles they'd faced when no one was watching. Yibo leaned against the piano, eyes soft. You know, I didn't realize until tonight how much this would hurt. Endings always hurt, Xiao Zhan said softly. But they're also what make the music beautiful. He began to play again, slowly, quietly, almost absent-mindedly. The melody was familiar but different now, as if it carried new meaning. The notes floated through the empty hall like drifting fireflies, tender and haunting. Yibo listened in silence, his gaze steady. You always play like your heart's on the line. Because it is, Xiao Zhan replied. Every song, it's a piece of who we are. Yibo hesitated, then reached out and placed his hand on the piano beside Xiao Zhan's. Then let's leave one more piece behind, he said. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the air around them seemed to glow. No cameras, no crowd, just two souls and the music that had defined their journey. Xiao Zhan nodded, and together they began to play. It wasn't planned. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. The piano carried the melody, soft, emotional, while Yibo's guitar filled the spaces in between like echoes of breath. Felt like time had stopped. The song rose and fell like waves, crashing softly against the edges of goodbye. At one point, Xiao Zhan closed his eyes and let the emotion flow through him, his voice trembling as he whispered, This is the sound of us. And Yibo, his head bowed, murmured back, Then let's make sure the world never forgets it. When the final note faded, neither of them moved. The sound lingered in the air like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Yibo exhaled slowly. That's it then. The last song. Xiao Zhan looked at him, his expression unreadable. No, he said gently. The last talk. A small smile tugged at Yibo's lips. You always have to be poetic. Someone has to be, Xiao Zhan teased. They both laughed again, and the hall seemed to breathe with them. The lights overhead flickered one last time, bathing them in golden glow, like the stage itself was saying goodbye. As they walked off together, their shadows stretched long across the wooden floor, side by side until the last inch of light disappeared. And somewhere behind them, the piano gave one soft, accidental note, like the music itself was refusing to let go. Outside the night was calm. The city lights shimmered in reflection across puddles from an earlier rain. They stood by the stage door, the cool air brushing against their faces. For a long while neither spoke. Finally Yibo turned to him. Do you think people will understand? Xiao Zhan smiled faintly. They don't have to. They'll feel it. That was their truth. Their connection had never been about explanations. It was always about emotion, the kind that stayed long after the lights went out. Before walking away, Yibo looked back once more. "Hey," he said quietly. "Thank you for the music, for everything." Xiao Zhan's gaze softened. "No," he said. "Thank you for listening." And with that, they went their separate ways into the night, two silhouettes fading into different directions, yet somehow, the same song still playing between them. Days later, fans would describe that night as magical, an ending that didn't feel like goodbye, but like a promise whispered through sound. Because the Last Symphony wasn't really over. It lived on, in every heart that heard it, in every silence that remembered its melody. And maybe that's what makes legends last forever. Not the applause, not the fame, but the moments that make you feel something real. So when you close your eyes tonight, listen carefully. Somewhere in the stillness you might just hear it, the faint harmony of Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo, the last talk, the final note that refuses to die. Sparkles if you felt the emotion in this story and want to experience more unforgettable moments between Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo. Stories of love, music and connection that will move your heart. Don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe to the channel.